I'm still learning how to color grade, so sometimes I look jaundiced or like Powder from the movie Powder. Hi, I'm Stanley Tucci, Development for Alex Fraioli. A long time ago, I was 7. At the time, my personal library consisted of Calvin and Hobbes and Lone Wolf Choose Your Own Adventure game books. Don't misunderstand, I didn't know half the words in them, but I knew they were doing something that I wanted more of. Bill Watterson's fantastical drawings and watercolors were perfect accompaniment to his characters' musings about life and existence. Joe Deaver's books were concurrently feeding my imagination with descriptions and sketches of beasts and ghouls, made all the more terrifying by their second-person narration and role-playing elements. Growing up, my family had a Sega Master System. My first understanding of video games was as toys. Games like Double Dragon and Hang-On were straightforward with clear goals, and exactly what a kid wants to play. But when my dad introduced me to Phantasy Star, it opened my eyes to what video games could be in the hands of storytellers. To my 7-year-old self, Phantasy Star didn't feel like a toy. It felt cozy, like one of my books. It had its own civilizations and mythologies, which it doled out to me in shadowy bits and pieces, often through poorly translated text that added an additional layer of alien mystique. Once we got our NES, I experienced a similar sensation from the other big JRPGs of the day. I had only just learned to read, and was already using this newfound ability to tear hungrily into the jagged flesh of 8-bit fantasy. Of course I loved the worlds I found in my books, but to a console kid like me, it was those early JRPGs that would finally combine visuals and narrative to create something alchemically new. Over time, I started seeking out more games with the power to engage, encourage, and challenge my mind, much in the same way that our imagination is tasked with giving form to a passage in print. And, as I've discussed before, pixel art's process of imaginative approximation is a great foundation for this. Aesthetics might be the first things you think of when I say cozy. Games like Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley have typically been regarded as chill experiences for folks to get comfy with under a blanket. But I don't believe that cozy is limited to soft colors and gentle music. It encompasses gameplay systems and choices, existing in all genres and complexities of play. It's a subjective sensation we get when a game makes us think, ooh, I like this. Cozy does not inherently imply an absence of challenge or resistance, but rather suggests a general confluence of supportive elements that make that challenge fun instead of needlessly stressful. Personally, I find losing time or progress to be the most stressful. In a fundamental way, I've always considered Dragon Quest to be cozier than classic Final Fantasy, because it lets the player retain their experience points, items, and plot progression when they die, even if it means losing half their gold. In other words, potentially large but temporary loss for small but permanent gain. This notion gets stretched to its limit in the Sega Genesis RPG Sword of Vermilion, which requires the player to forfeit all of their money and weapons in order to eventually obtain the titular sword of Vermilion. I find incremental growth to be, by its very nature, cozy. The idea that throwing yourself at a problem and failing is not a waste of time, that your experience in-game and out is adding up. This feeling, too, is subjective. I don't personally find FromSoft games cozy, but I get why someone would. My cozy exists on a separate axis from what I think of as visceral or intense gameplay elements. These things can and often do coexist. Survival horror games are actually great at splitting the difference between cozy and visceral. In fact, they rely on it. My beloved Final Fantasy XIV is another good example, with no shortage of scenic environments to explore, or, if you're up for them, frenetic high-end boss fights that require coordinated planning, practice, and precision. In fact, I approach these aspects of the game as separate experiences. For crafting, gathering, or main scenario quests, I get comfy on the living room couch. But when I meet with my raid group every week, I'm sitting upright in front of the PC in my office because it's time to focus up. Sometimes I do want that intense gameplay experience, but I typically play games to relax, which means that by and large, I crave that low-key cozy. This is my own personal manifesto on game design, and your idea of cozy may not align completely with mine. I'm going to be exploring specific elements that get on my nerves, the subtle ways in which games use or misuse your time, the industry's changing tastes, and how these all feed into the player experience. This is done mostly in the context of JRPGs because that's my jam. I want random battles, turn-based combat, and a protagonist who has never said a word in their goddamn life. So let's kick it off with the game that inspired me to sit down and hash these ideas out in the first place. In 1991, I encountered Dragon Warrior 3, a game that, like Phantasy Star before it, expanded my understanding of what games could do with storytelling. It was the first video game I played to imply a rich continuity between installments. It was, after all, a stealth prequel. It taught me as a child that video games, just like books and film, are capable of interconnected storytelling across multiple entries. And mechanically, it built upon the systems of the first two games in satisfying, innovative ways. I have exactly one tattoo, and it is DQ3 related. It's also gotten me kicked out of at least one Japanese bath. Hey, I asked at the front desk before I paid if tattoos were allowed. They said yeah. Then some asshole saw it, got out of the bath, and complained to the staff. You have any idea how embarrassing it is to be tapped on the shoulder and kicked out of a bath by a fully clothed person? So when the HD 2D remake of Dragon Quest III was announced, I was all in. One of my favorite games ever, redone in a gorgeous style that had already been certified cozy by games like Octopath Traveler. But when it finally came out, something was off about it. And as the game wore on, it started to feel unreasonable, almost abrasive. Some of the changes made to this remake seem intended to make it more accessible to newcomers, which is something I'm actually fine with. Zoom is now free and can be used indoors. Some dungeons, like Skyfell Tower, have been rendered idiot-proof by revealing previously ambiguous paths, and even the tightrope is marked on the spot where you're supposed to fall in order to find the treasure. New scenes and bosses have been added, which I don't disagree with on principle, but do feel are a little silly here. Ham-fisted backstory is caked on to flesh out the fascinating origin of your dad's helmet. Turns out his friends gave it to him. These things are clumsy, but generally inoffensive and easy to ignore. But the remake futzes with the gameplay in two specific ways that disrupt the experience. New items and accessories have been added to heal or prevent status ailments, and to justify their existence, a number of classic monsters and bosses have now been given party-wide spells or breath attacks that inflict sleep, stop spell, dazzle, or paralysis. On top of that, some monsters that already use these attacks now show up in more areas. Enemy health has been jacked up across the board, with some monsters and bosses having double or even triple their original HP. The balance of the game has been upended, and many encounters turned into gimmicky, drawn-out chores merely for the sake of being different. This results in a battle experience that is constantly tripping over its own shoelaces when it was better off going barefoot. My other issue with the game is with the increased size and scale of its overworld and dungeons. The team has created beautiful but bloated new environments based on the original Dragon Quest III that slow the experience down to a cumbersome crawl, particularly the overworld. Even with Dash enabled, it takes a fair amount of time to get anywhere. Instead of a leisurely stroll to the next town or dungeon, you're sitting through twice as many random battles, expending twice the resources, and burning through twice the patience. I suspect this is why they added piles of mostly worthless garbage everywhere, to give you the tiniest little butterfly kiss of dopamine as you plod ever onward to wherever it is you were supposed to be already. As if to draw attention to the game's own protracted flow, Square Enix posted side-by-side comparisons of the original 8-bit DQ3 and the HD 2D. The remake has ballooned the game's environments by so much that, to showcase the two parties moving in tandem, the Famicom version had to be slowed down to almost half speed. These videos were likely thrown together by marketing, but I have to wonder if seeing them side by side would have set off any alarm bells at all among the dev team. Extra frustrating is that after receiving a boost in the Game Boy Color remake, your flying speed has been bafflingly reduced to that of the 8-bit original. Except now, the map is humongous! Lamia, giddy the hell up! The inflated scale of the world, combined with a pumped-up quotient of obnoxious encounters, causes the adventure to lose more and more of its luster as the game wears on. By the end of the game, my attitude had shifted noticeably from, I can't wait to explore the new post-game content, to, I just want to finish the main quest so I can play something else. Somewhere along the way, the game stopped being cozy. The late Yoshitaka Murayama, scenario writer of Suikoden 1 and 2, understood the intricacies of scale and timing in plotting RPGs. In this promotional video from the development of Cattle Call's Alliance Alive, Murayama can be seen marking scenes, towns, dungeons, and overworld sections with time estimates in tandem with the scenario dialogue he is writing.
時間ってこれ何なんですか？
これ全体的な、お話のあらすじが書かれていて、でこの時間が実際にプレイした時にここまでどのぐらいの時間で来るかっていう予測というか予定ですね。この町からこの町まで すぐ行ってほしいのか、それとも苦労して、一生懸命ダンジョンを抜けてここまで行ってほしいのかっていうのでお話のイメージが変わってくるんで、例えば最初の閉鎖美術館は30分もかけたら行けるダンジョンで、その奥でのイベントまで行ってほしいというような、指定です。
0.25 時間とか15分ってことですよね。
そうです。
かなり細かく想定されてますよね。
そうですね。これが実際にそういくかどうかは別としても、作る時の、目安にもなるように細かく指定を入れてます。
閉鎖美術館から脱出後、最初の街に戻り、アイテム購入含め30分、次に向かうダンジョンの場所を突き止めるまで15分。プレイヤーの行動をここまで細かく計算しているとは驚きだ。
An approach to world and scenario design that carefully considers pacing makes all the sense in the world. It should only take a few minutes to reach the cave of the monster that's been terrorizing the village. It should take a little longer to reach the remote monastery in the snow-capped mountains. But when everything feels like a slog, something is wrong. Yeah, Suikoden has sprawling overworlds, but Murayama knew to balance these with brisk movement speed and mild encounter rates to control the amount of time it takes to cross them. I don't claim to know Art Inc. or Square Enix's reasons for doing things this way, but I have a hunch. To the average consumer, bigger is necessarily better. Perhaps the developers just wanted to expand the world of this famous and influential game. But the way in which they chose to do that was to add broad, empty, functionless space and unnecessary monster buffs that inadvertently upset the scale. The result is exhausting, but it's playable. I may have lost interest by the end, but I did collapse across the finish line. If you really want to talk about unplayable, then we're talking about my chief bugbear, the open world. 1998 was my first taste of true free-roaming 3D exploration in the form of Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field. This was a pivotal moment for the series. This sprawling expanse for many people signaled the start of a new journey not just for Link, but for all of us. A rolling green promise of adventure and possibility for action-adventure games, at least according to the magazines and message boards of the time. Meanwhile, I'm 15 and I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to make of this. This isn't exciting to me. You've separated and scattered all the fun parts of the game on opposite ends of this giant, interminable field. Breath of the Wild, being open world, is of course the ultimate evolution of this. It took my least favorite part of Ocarina and said, hey, what if Hyrule Field was the whole game? When it came out, I made the mistake of asking my Zelda friends, hey, I like Zelda, but I hate open world. Will I like Breath of the Wild? And they all excitedly lied yes. I tried. Open world just isn't my thing. I don't get it, and I'm not gonna get it. And before you start clacking away in the comments trying to recommend open world games you think I would like, please don't. If someone tells you they're allergic to peanuts, your response doesn't need to be, well, you probably just never had a good one. The critical term I've heard tossed around a lot to describe open world is one-inch ocean, but I wouldn't want to play in a mile-deep ocean either. I need game worlds and experiences to be deliberate and finite, crafted and intimate. When I play an open world game, I instead get the sensation that I am being distracted or babysat, that the runtime is being padded by never-ending legwork and expanse, that some cosmic parent is placating me with mature Minecraft. Open world is my anti-cozy, and it is an approach to game design that I categorically reject. Earlier I talked about how I enjoy Final Fantasy XIV. Certainly that game employs an open world. Well, not exactly. The difference is that a world like Eorzea doesn't feel barren to me because I'm journeying and interacting with actual people. Dungeons are linearly designed to be completed by a party of 4 in 15 to 20 minutes. Fast travel is as simple and convenient as it can possibly be. Side quests are either level-gated or adjusted to prevent the player from wasting time and resources on content out of their league. Most of the content I do is high-end Savage or Ultimate fights anyway, which are predominantly reflex-based and take place in small arenas. In terms of exploration, the experience is comparable to traditional 3D JRPGs, which use individual zones to effect a controlled form of free exploration that respects the player's time. And that's really the issue here, right? Time. There is a direct correlation between scale and the amount of time a game is going to demand from you. Larger scale games aim for that epic experience, but epic isn't really something that resonates with me. The word epic traditionally intoned a sweeping, majestic adventure, but has been twisted by popular culture into a marketing buzzword that now hews closer to artificially inflated grandeur or manufactured heroism. But it's not impossible to use a wider scale productively, even, dare I say, cozily. Let's look at Shadow of the Colossus. The Forbidden Land itself is a character, a silent, desolate, deathly beautiful place that serves as the backdrop for quiet interstitial between pulse-pounding battles. This is not aimless wandering. The player is following the sword's light to the next boss, circumnavigating cliffs and hills in order to receive the reward of glorious combat. These exploratory segments serve as a fine-grained texture to accentuate the coarse, chaotic encounters that divide them. The game has a distinct and deliberate find, slay, repeat rhythm that is represented in its sonic topography. Stretches of hoofbeats and meditative silence punctuated by Ko Otani's bombastic score function appropriately like musical dynamics, the way a composition might alternate between piano and forte and back again. This contrast is a function of the distances the player must cross and the time required to do so. The size and scope of this world are functional and precise. This isn't epic. It's art. My point here is that scale as a parameter doesn't magically do anything by itself. Cool, you made your towns far apart. Wow, just like real life. And you can dot that map with as many moblins or shrines or bears as you like, I'm still gonna fall asleep. But that's a me problem. My ideal form of interactive fiction is one that doesn't waste words or time. If an author drafted a chapter in which their protagonist did nothing but wander across a field for 40 pages with no larger bearing on anything, the publisher's gonna send it back to them with the note, "The hell is this?" Of course, I didn't make this realization until after I had grown up. Because as a child, you believe that you have infinite time to plug away at every video game you can get your hands on. I spent most of my free time playing video games all the way up through college. I even chose to take summer classes one year because I knew I would be doing nothing but playing Final Fantasy XI all day, every day on a quiet, empty campus. And it was pretty good. At the time, I was also freelancing for a handful of online video game media outlets, part-time jobs that only reinforced how normal it was to give all my time and attention to video games. But after being in the adult world for a while, other responsibilities started to accumulate, and I suddenly had to be very discriminating when it came to choosing which games to give my limited time to. Bloated worlds are antithetical to my idea of cozy, but that doesn't mean that all linear JRPGs are off the hook. Recall that my main criticism of DQ3 HD2D's battles is that after a while they start to feel artificially lengthened. One of the key ways in which RPG experiences can be streamlined is through tighter battle engines and systems. This starts with, but is not necessarily limited to, character movement. More detailed attack animations were one of 3D's first obvious visual improvements over sprites, but after that PS1 honeymoon phase, I started to notice how easy it was for them to get out of hand. In the mid to late 2000s, as technical specs continued climbing, I found myself playing more and more games on the DS and PSP for reasons I didn't quite understand at the time. In retrospect, I was drawn to the visual styles most suited to handhelds, the ones that consoles were starting to leave behind. 2D RPGs like your classic FFs, DQs, Chrono Trigger, etc. tend to be fast and compact, with very little going to waste. Sprites are a pain in the ass to animate, and as a result, there tend to be fewer wasted frames and less compulsion to over-animate. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Lost Odyssey, a beautiful game whose experience buckles under the weight of its slow, sweeping animations and timed hits. Games like Fantasian find a sweet spot by splitting the difference between speed and visuals, much like a PS1 game. If I'm going to be fighting hundreds or even thousands of battles per game, those things should be streamlined, but especially 3D games. It's why Final Fantasy eventually gave us the courtesy of opting for truncated summons. Sure, they're cool to sit through a couple times, but every time after that, I'm making the wrap it up motion to Bahamut's face. Yeah, I get it, Dragon. Series like Bravely Default and some of Square Enix's HD remasters wisely allow the player to simply speed everything up, which is a great option to have once you have your bearings. But as we've seen, not every 2D game is innocent either. Octopath Traveler's random battles and HP bloat became so pervasive by the end of the game that I still haven't gone back to finish it. When I imagine putting that cart back in my Switch, the first thing that comes to mind isn't dramatic character scenes or high-tension boss fights, but slowly plinking away at monsters' shields. It's the same kind of mental block I have with Lost Odyssey. Part of me wants to resume the game to spend more time with the characters, read more poignant short stories, or just see where the plot goes. Then I remember how slow and laborious the battles are and just end up reading a book instead. I was pleasantly surprised at what a nice balance Fantasian strikes. Battles are brisk, but also challenging enough that you're not just mashing A. On top of that, the Dimension system gives the player added economy of time by allowing them to bank random encounters and then do them all at once at their leisure. Last year's Scarmonde is another game that keeps fights brief thanks to its 8-bit Final Fantasy-inspired battle system. This combines with brisk movement speed to make exploration a joy. But for my money, the king of snappy JRPG battles is always going to be Suikoden 1 and 2. Actions are performed simultaneously wherever possible, which goes a long way to streamline encounters. Like any good JRPG, the options to flee or auto-battle are always 2 button presses away. The sprite work is great and attack animations are brief but evocative. And all of this is done with a 6-person party. Suikoden 3 tried to pull this off when the series transitioned to 3D, but did so clumsily with constant disorienting camera shifts. They fixed it by 5 though. What about 4? I'm not playing 4! Reining in scale and animation is a basic way of curbing overconsumption of the player's time in the long run. The fact is, all 3D games come with this trade-off. 3D visuals can look great and obviously do have their uses. But the extra baggage of a third dimension can bog down a game's fundamental processes if the designer isn't focused. Realism! Games have been chasing it forever. As soon as the technology allowed, developers began creating games that look and feel more and more like movies, a trajectory that has more or less remained steady. But when it comes to cozy, I find aesthetic realism to be a neutral tool. If the immediate elements of your game world, things like graphics, physics, and sound design, are super realistic, neat. You didn't need to do that. It's an easy choice for me between photorealism and stylization. I prefer a game to have a visual attitude. And that's a mercifully wide umbrella. Pixel art, cell shading, low poly, even just unique art direction. It's all viable. Because when I see a character model that just looks like a guy, it pings the part of my brain responsible for processing live feeds of municipal meetings.
When I explained the issues of bottlenecks and blind spots to school staff personnel, they acknowledged the problem, but seemed unaware of it until I brought it up. I also attended a public engagement meeting.
But you know what? If realism was all about aesthetics, I wouldn't give it a second thought. It's the simulation side of realism that often gets twisted and crammed into video games out of a misplaced allegiance to immersion. Things like weapon durability or having to eat food to satiate a separate hunger meter are gameplay elements that I have always found unwelcome and unjustifiable. Remember when Resident Evil made you take drugs to see items? How come that didn't show up in 8? Because it sucks. These things have always felt like an afterthought to me, as though someone developing the game analyzed the base experience and deemed it not gamified enough. Yuji Horí's comments in this interview from the April 1988 issue of Beep magazine are prescient. One thing that scares me lately is this growing tendency to want games to be more realistic. I don't think realism is bad per se, but in an effort to be more realistic, all these designers are adding things that, from a gameplay perspective, are just boring or annoying. Even if you're striving for realism, I think you have to simplify things a bit for the game's sake. You've got to bring out the fun element within that realism, you know? What this comes down to is, I don't need more things to worry about. Whatever you think these disposable mechanics are adding to my experience, I promise you they are not. I do understand that added complexity and parameters are, of course, able to be slotted into someone's idea of fun. Hell, my dad loved military sims like Shingen the Ruler and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Historical games that stress the micromanagement of resources like rice and princesses. That was his cozy. But I'm a story guy. My interest is in narrative delivery first and foremost, and whether or not that experience is surrounded and supported by functional intuitive systems. This isn't to say that I don't like a challenge. I recently finished Final Fantasy VI on stream without gaining a single experience point. Not a single point! Death by Chipmunk, thank you, I'm drinking water.
Cloud9 shit.
But a game should flow smoothly, and I want the systems that keep that train rolling to be streamlined, intuitive, and out of my way. In short, I play games to avoid realism. For 10 years, I ran retro video game bar Critical Hit in Nagoya, Japan, no longer right off the Beltline. In that time, I entertained a diverse range of customers. If someone around my age or younger came in, I found it easy enough to relate. We could usually make small talk about new releases or the latest Nintendo Direct, or just gab about retro games like Final Fantasy XII. But customers older than me could go either way. I got a lot of guys in their 50s and 60s whose only nostalgic memories were of the arcade coin-ops of the 80s. This age range has fond memories of games like Frogger and Pac-Man as bowling alley distractions because they were there. It wasn't necessarily on their radar when the home market exploded and video games came into their own as a consumer product and hobby. Perhaps my bar was recommended to them by a friend, or maybe they saw the 4.8 star rating on Google Maps and thought, hey, sure, I remember video games. But I could always tell these guys at a glance by the way they entered the shop, looked around at the TVs, consoles, and plastic figures, and eventually said, huh, where's the arcade machines? In their time, those machines served a simple function, a fun way to pass time in a public space while waiting for your friends and/or pizza to arrive. Even in a dedicated setting, these games provided a great backdrop for private conversation, enveloped as you were in the cacophony of an arcade or other loud place. It's hard to think of them as cozy, but to the average person, these machines neatly filled the roles of attraction and distraction, and largely informed what many think of now as retro video games. It's why the Twitch retro category icon is a Space Invaders machine instead of a Spriteworks sword or mushroom. It's a symbol of a time when video games were a compelling new cultural force. Because of the way the medium has evolved from roller rink attractions to 100-hour sit-down experiences and everything in between, we are not all going to be on the same footing when we talk about video games. No shade on those guys who entered my bar disappointed. Most of them were nice enough to stick around for a bit. I did, after all, sell alcohol. They typically had a good time, and as if waking from cryostasis, learned a bit about what games have become in the intervening decades. In fact, the reason I bring this up is because, in a way, I'm starting to identify with them. They saw games as attraction and distraction, but those of us who brought console and computer games into our homes became more acquainted with their dynamic third role, escapism. And no matter what you're into, it is that roasty-toasty sensation of escapism that is ultimately at the gooey core of cozy. When we get comfy, we get lost in a game. It is only a cozy game that can look us in the eye and say, shh, come in, come on, get in here, come on, it's okay. You're a dolphin for the next 2 hours. When I say I identify with my arcade boomer customers, I'm talking about a satisfaction that precludes any interest or investment in trends. It was never important to these guys that you can now play Donkey Kong at home. Likewise, my basic escapist needs have been met for years, and no amount of ray tracing or haptic feedback is going to make a story better or a battle system more intuitive. I stopped buying consoles last generation, and at 4 years old, my PC is starting to show its age. But I'm satisfied with that. Is this what they mean by get good? Because, yeah, I think I'm good. You may be thinking, Alex, why don't you just read a book? And you're not wrong. To me, the process of reading a good story overlaps with that of escaping into a cozy game. And that's partially because my understanding and my love of video games grew out of them as storytelling devices. I still enjoy reading, and if I'm stuck in transit, I'd much rather have a book than a game. But because of the added elements they provide, if I'm snug at home, nothing quite engages and excites like a game. Games celebrate participation, the act of simultaneously contributing to and riding that emotional wave as it comes crashing down through and around you. When a boss's theme hits as you're busting your ass trying to take it down, it feels personal and impactful, regardless of genre, engine, or visual style. These moments aren't choreographed the same way that film and television are. And when your kind of game hits, it really hits. Remember last video when I said I found it difficult to nitpick a video game while my dad was in the hospital? Well, let me put it this way. He was alive when I started writing this script, and when he passed, it really started to put things into focus for me in regards to how I spend my time. I feel like I'm at a point in my life where it's really time to be more discerning about these things. I try to approach things with an open mind, but time is a finite resource, and games just don't appeal to me in the same way that they used to. To me, providing escape into a fascinating tale is the greatest thing a game can do. This gets trickier as we get older, not necessarily because games have changed, but because we have. We become inured to the tropes and archetypes that dot the landscape, rolling our eyes so hard at a tired plot device that we don't notice the well-written characters picking up the slack. Media literacy and pattern recognition are two crucial skills to have. But when they intersect critically, they can make a lot of fiction seem transparent and predictable, giving way to a cynicism that makes it hard to enjoy anything. As a kid, escape happened as a matter of course. Now, I've got to be mindful about it. Art is like anything worthwhile. It only gives back what you put in. For example, podcast powerhouse and charming man Matt Gorley loves to watch movies, but he's wise enough to be mindful of his current mood when he does. Whether he's having a good or bad day, he makes a note of this when logging films on Letterboxd. A film is rated as good, bad, or okay, but so is Matt's mood at the time, which acts as a lens for the review as a whole. Art, after all, does not exist in a vacuum. We all sometimes get stuck in a negative headspace, but the secret to getting the most out of any piece of media is being present and attentive. Roger Ebert famously reassessed Clint Eastwood's 1992 Western Unforgiven, originally awarding it 2.5 stars. 10 years later, he re-reviewed it as a 4-star film. Why? Well, because in 1992, Roger was stressing out about his impending wedding, and this stress soured his initial review. This doesn't mean you have to be all sunshine and lollipops when you sit down to play a game, but you should be aware of your mood and how it might color that experience. In fact, a heightened emotional intelligence is something that will boost every facet of your life. So, do that. All of these preferences I've shared with you have me, now in my 40s, gravitating more and more towards visual novels and indie games. Experiences that feel deliberate and meaningful to me in this stage of my life, in contrast to the overwhelming presence of high-budget AAA blockbusters that tend to lean on their humongous scale and production values. I want something that's well-written, respects my time, engages my imagination, and feels like a fun challenge instead of a sequence of chores. That's what my cozy is. But feel free to leave yours in the comments. I'm not going to disagree or argue with you because opinions can't be wrong. In fact, here's a few from some of the patrons at patreon.com/Patui who helped make this video possible. Wristwatch Otaku and indie game dev Asatir says, "A game I find coziness in is called Satisfactory. You build automated systems in it to build more intricate automated systems. I find coziness in the automation since it allows me to explore the game's world for more resources to upgrade. Having one or many hundred less things to worry about somehow relieved me of some stress." Neat! I've never played it. Thunder from Down Under Dale Bastion says, "Crash Bandicoot has a reputation as an annoyingly hard platformer, and it is! But I got introduced to the series as a child and developed a comfortable familiarity for its 3D jumping bastardry, and so I revisit it yearly. Crash Bandicoots 2 and 3 specifically structure their levels in groups of 5, letting you tackle them in whatever order you want, and 99% of them consist of a linear obstacle course rather than the big open plains of your Marios and Spyros and what have you. There's no decision to be made on which stars to get when, and progress is only made by completing levels, not by getting specific abilities. The end result feels like hitting shuffle on a favorite old playlist. I know all the hits, I can hustle through them with no hassle, and I can't think of anything cozier." Neat! I've never played it. IRL Pictomancer Enerjax writes, "Not sure if it's cozy because after years of playing FF6 it feels like my own backyard, or because the characters are so lovable, or the music so beautiful. But something about coming back to this unique world that I'm able to explore and change for the better gives me comfort and happiness." Hey, me too! It's my favorite FF for a reason. Mike the Hitman Wasson says, "What most signifies coziness in games for me are the little bits of everyday life that intrude on an epic story. Lovingly drawn or rendered furniture, a comfy chair, a hutch with plates and glasses on display, an inviting fire, reminds me that this is a world with people living normal, meaningful lives. There are so many good choices, but I've always loved how homes looked in Secret of Mana." Secret of Mana is great. I was so excited the first time I beat it as a kid that I called my friend up late at night to tell him, and before his mom woke him up, she asked me, "Is it important?" Purple Ambassador Pimento writes, "Link's Awakening would be that cozy game for me. I was 12, it was the first Zelda game and first adventure game that was mine, and it was that much more personal playing it on a Game Boy. Just exploring that tightly packed space with all those kooky characters occasionally breaking the fourth wall really drew me into the experience." Yeah, Koholint Island is cozy as hell and got me through more than a few road trips across Interstate 70. And Phantasy Star 4 fan Quest Moreland says, "Phantasy Star 4. It's a game that I can always go back to no matter how long it's been. It wasn't QML's first RPG, but it was the first time that I understood what an RPG was. And it's the game that really got me into RPGs. It's a game that I can mindlessly grind in, but also a game that I really enjoy from a story perspective. This weeb got hooked by the anime manga cutscenes, and it has created a lifelong love of RPGs." And hey, I'll leave you with my coziest pick in recent memory. I really enjoyed Square Enix's The Centennial Case, a 2022 live-action detective story filmed in the style of a Japanese drama, but with a flow that tamps gameplay down to the nuts and bolts of investigative work. Menu-based sleuthing, piecing together evidence, and making cases to catch murderers? Now that's cozy! The modern mystery game graciously approaches branching narratives and outcomes the way that I used to read those lone wolf books as a kid, with one finger remaining on the choice as I flip ahead for a peek at my fate. If you too would like to join the hallowed ranks of the supporters and have a chance to sound off in an upcoming video, please head to patreon.com/Patui and meditate on its various contents and bonuses, including the exclusive Dragon Quest X audio Let's Play series 10 in 10. Everything else I do is linked from patui.org, including my voice work, Blue Sky, Twitch, and the award-wanting podcast No More Whoppers. Until next time, grab a blanket and get cozy. But not too cozy.